when the empath finally stops pleasing everyone. The shocking truth Carl Jung revealed. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung. If you've ever felt exhausted from carrying the emotions of others, or silenced your truth just to keep the peace, this message is for you. Today, we explore what happens when an empath finally chooses themselves not out of spite, but out of spiritual awakening and sacred self-respect. Jung called it individuation, the moment when you stop dissolving into others and start remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Have you reached that point? Comment below. I choose my truth. Let us know what this shift means to you. Your story may awaken someone else's power. 1. The core awakening. When an empath finally stops trying to please everyone, they don't become cruel, they become conscious. They stop betraying themselves for approval and begin to recognize that their constant giving was not always love. It was often a survival mechanism. Carl Jung called this individuation the sacred process of becoming whole, of integrating the fragmented self that was once shaped by everyone else's expectations. The empath doesn't lose their light. They redirect it inward. And in doing so, they no longer become the sponge for other people's chaos. They become a mirror, clear, still, and deeply aware. What most people fail to realize is that the empath's sensitivity is often a symptom of past emotional trauma, not just a spiritual gift. It's the result of being conditioned to anticipate others' moods, manage their emotions, and self-abandon in the name of peace. Jung would describe this as survival sensitivity, the kind of hyper-awareness that comes from years of emotional caretaking, often developed in childhood when love was conditional, attention was inconsistent, and silence meant safety. As adulthood arrives, the empath continues these patterns without question, thinking this is what it means to be kind, to be good, to be needed. They say yes when their soul screams no. They overextend, over-apologize, and overwrite their truth just to avoid conflict. But eventually, the nervous system can't take it anymore. The body aches. The heart hardens. The soul becomes exhausted. Then comes the breaking point, a moment of sacred pause where the empath no longer asks, "How can I help?" but instead, "What about me?" That shift marks the beginning of a profound spiritual awakening. It's not selfish. It's sacred. Because for the first time, the empath begins to see themselves not as a tool for others' healing, but as a soul worthy of their own care. They stop trying to fix what doesn't want to be fixed. They stop rescuing people who feed on their light but never reciprocate. And they stop confusing love with sacrifice. This journey is not easy. It requires the empath to confront their own inner wounds, the places where they learned they had to earn love, where boundaries felt like betrayal, and where self-abandonment was praised as virtue. But as they do the inner work, they begin to reclaim lost parts of themselves. They rediscover the voice they silenced, the dreams they postponed, the needs they suppressed. Slowly, they realize that the most spiritual thing they can do is honor their own energy. They understand that true compassion does not come from depletion, but from wholeness, and that healing others is never a substitute for healing yourself. In a society that rewards overfunctioning and applauds emotional martyrdom, this kind of spiritual clarity is radical. Because once an empath awakens, they are no longer controlled by guilt or fear. They no longer need to be liked to feel valuable. They no longer shrink to make others feel comfortable. Instead, they radiate a grounded strength, a quiet power that says, I am here, and I am no longer abandoning myself for anyone. This is the heart of individuation, a spiritual homecoming where the empath becomes a sovereign being, not cold, but clear, not detached, but discerning, no longer performing roles to survive, but choosing to live in alignment. This kind of awakening dismantles every illusion society projects onto the empath. It breaks the cycles of emotional codependency and reclaims the sacred truth that you were never meant to be everyone's healer. You were meant to be whole. And in that wholeness, you become more magnetic, more authentic, more spiritually aligned than ever before. This is not the end of empathy. It is its rebirth. Now grounded in truth, elevated by boundaries, and lit by the fire of your own inner knowing. Are you ready to stop pleasing the world and start honoring your true self? If this message speaks to your soul, comment below. I choose my awakening to claim your power and begin this journey of spiritual wisdom and transformation. 2. The 8 signs of conscious awakening. When an empath begins their spiritual awakening, the most powerful shift doesn't come with thunder or lightning. It comes in silence, in the moment they stop pouring themselves into everyone else and start turning inward. This is when they stop absorbing the chaos around them and begin reclaiming their own vitality. Their energy, once scattered across countless emotional landscapes, begins to return home. They no longer feel responsible for fixing the emotional states of others or being the emotional sponge for every room they enter. Instead, they become selective, grounded, and intentional, holding their frequency with care. This isn't selfishness. It's the beginning of spiritual development, where sensitivity meets sovereignty and empathy gains direction. As their energy recalibrates, they shed the social mask they've worn for years, the smiling, agreeable, self-sacrificing version of themselves that kept them safe. Carl Jung called this the death of the persona, a critical step in the journey toward individuation. It's the moment when the empath no longer smiles to survive, but speaks to be seen. And that voice, once hidden beneath layers of compliance, emerges not as rebellion, but as truth. In this space of clarity, they begin to withdraw projections they once cast onto others. They no longer romanticize potential or excuse harmful behavior with spiritual bypassing. Instead of saying, they're just wounded, they begin to say, and I deserve peace. They see people for who they are, not who they hope they'll become. The spell of idealization breaks, and with it, the empath's unconscious participation in cycles of emotional labor ends. This awakening births sacred boundaries, not as punishments or rigid walls, but as clear, compassionate lines drawn in self-respect. The word no becomes a full sentence. They stop apologizing for protecting their energy. Every boundary becomes an affirmation. I am not here to be consumed. Alongside this, the heavy weight of guilt begins to lift guilt that was never truly theirs to carry. It was sewn into their nervous system by those who benefited from their self-abandonment. But now, guilt dissolves, and in its place rises a new foundation of self-care that isn't transactional, but devotional. They realize that they don't need to be depleted to be worthy. As they grow, the need for external validation fades. They no longer shapeshift to be liked or betray themselves to stay connected. They choose authenticity over approval, even if it means facing loneliness. And yet, this loneliness isn't empty, it is sacred space. In that space, the empath begins to nurture themselves the way they once nurtured others. They become their own sanctuary, their own healer. The love they once desperately tried to earn now flows inward as they reparent their inner child, offering tenderness and safety from within. This internal shift empowers them to show up differently in relationships. They no longer confuse compassion with enmeshment. They feel deeply, but stay rooted. They hold space without being consumed. This is boundaried compassion, a form of love that honors the self as much as the other. Eventually, they attract a new kind of connection, relationships built on mutual respect, energetic responsibility, and spiritual awareness. These connections don't require performance, only presence. They are no longer drawn to chaos or intensity masquerading as love. They are drawn to peace. And in this new frequency, they no longer fear losing people. They fear losing themselves. So they choose themselves again and again, not in bitterness, but in reverence. They know now that the most spiritual thing they can do is protect their energy, speak their truth, and walk away from anything that dishonors their soul. What was once perceived as weakness is now their greatest strength. The courage to stop pleasing, the wisdom to start healing, and the grace to evolve without apology. This is not the end of empathy. It is its elevation. It is empathy infused with clarity, rooted in truth, and guided by the soul's deepest intelligence. If these 8 signs of conscious awakening speak to your soul, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Your journey into spiritual wisdom and Carl Jung's truth is just beginning. 3. Shadow work and the empath's rage. Buried beneath the empath's gentle exterior is a quiet rage, a sacred fire forged through years of emotional labor, betrayal, and unreciprocated care. It isn't anger for its own sake. It's the unspoken grief of always being expected to be the healer, the peacemaker, the one who absorbs everyone's chaos and carries it in silence. Carl Jung taught that what we suppress doesn't disappear. It festers in the unconscious, shaping our behavior until we choose to face it. And when the empath finally stops pleasing everyone and turns inward, they don't become cold or cruel. They become clear. This is the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole. The rage isn't a breakdown. It's a breakthrough. It's the voice that was silenced finally rising, not to destroy, but to liberate. Instead of reacting impulsively or people-pleasing out of habit, the awakened empath becomes selective, no longer offering their energy to every crisis or false emergency. They develop spiritual wisdom and emotional intelligence that allows them to distinguish between authentic need and manipulative dependence. What once felt like compassion now becomes discernment. They no longer say yes to preserve harmony at the cost of their own nervous system. They say no with love, clarity, and power. They create boundaries that aren't rooted in fear, but in self-respect. The empath learns that healing isn't about fixing others. It's about honoring the truth of their own experience. Their silence becomes sacred. Their presence becomes magnetic. Their choices begin to reflect their inner evolution. This shift is uncomfortable for those who benefited from the empath's self-neglect. But it is not the empath's job to soothe everyone else's discomfort. Their responsibility is to stop betraying themselves. The rage they once feared is now their guide. It leads them back to their authentic self. They no longer give to be needed. They give when it aligns with truth. This is not a collapse. It's a recalibration. As Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The empath no longer lives by default. They live by design. And in doing so, they become a mirror that reflects the dysfunction of the world, not to shame it, but to invite it into healing. This is spiritual awakening in its rawest form. Not light without darkness, but wholeness forged in the fire of reclaimed identity. If you've ever felt the fire behind your silence, comment, "I agree." If you see it differently, share your view with, "I don't think so." Your voice matters on this journey of shadow work and spiritual awakening. 4. The Night Sea Journey. Carl Jung described the individuation process as a night sea journey, a descent into psychological darkness, where something old must die so something authentic can be born. For the empath, this isn't symbolic, it's lived. It begins the moment they stop pleasing everyone, stop over-functioning, stop betraying themselves for peace that only serves others. The empath doesn't become cold or cruel. They become dangerous, but only to systems that have thrived on their silent sacrifice. They begin to lose relationships, but not love. They lose dynamics built on emotional servitude. They say no for the first time, not to reject connection, but to honor their truth. And in the emptiness that follows, they don't find loneliness. They find sacred solitude. This is where they meet themselves, stripped of roles, free of guilt, beyond performance. It's not a void, it's a mirror. And what they see is someone they've always been, but were never allowed to become. They begin to protect their energy, not out of fear, but out of reverence. They learn that boundaries are not barriers. They are bridges to deeper authenticity. In this silence, something radical happens. The empath hears their own voice, not echoed through others' expectations, but pure and unfiltered. That voice doesn't whisper apologies. It speaks clarity. This is spiritual awakening, not a retreat from life, but a return to self. The empath no longer confuses being needed with being loved. They no longer bleed to keep others warm. They no longer tolerate environments where their pain must remain unspoken. They stop absorbing energy and start channeling it. They don't burn out, they burn clean. And this threatens everything built on their compliance. They radiate spiritual wisdom, not from books, but from scars turned into insight. They embody resilience, not as a reaction, but as a frequency. Every step away from people-pleasing becomes a step toward self-possession. They no longer seek to be chosen. They realize they were never meant to be owned. They walk with the quiet strength of someone who has died to the world's expectations and been reborn in truth. And so, the Night Sea Journey is not a tragedy. It's a transformation. The empath, who once dimmed their light to comfort others, now becomes the flame itself. They don't apologize for their radiance. They understand that spirituality isn't softness, it's sovereignty. And spiritual growth isn't about fixing others, it's about facing the self, embracing solitude, and walking through the darkness, not to escape it, but to become it. 5. Psychological and physical healing. When an empath finally stops living to please others, the body speaks a different language. The chronic fatigue that once felt endless begins to loosen its grip. The anxiety that curled itself around your chest starts to release, and those mysterious aches, imbalances, and illnesses that no test could explain slowly begin to fade. Because for the first time in years, maybe decades, the empath's nervous system is no longer under siege. No longer trapped in a loop of hypervigilance, no longer absorbing every unspoken emotion in the room, no longer over-identifying with the suffering of others. This is not merely rest. This is repair. This is what Carl Jung hinted at when he said that individuation, the process of becoming your true self, is the most dangerous thing you can do in a society that thrives on your self-denial. And the danger is not to others, but to every system, every relationship, and every expectation that relied on your silence, your compliance, and your emotional labor. Healing begins at the moment you stop running from yourself. It begins not just with boundaries, but with deep, energetic sovereignty. When you start saying no to what drains you and yes to what nourishes you, the soul begins to return to the body. And with that return comes a miraculous recalibration. Your digestion improves, your breath slows, your sleep deepens. This is not magic, it's nervous system regulation. This is the body finally feeling safe enough to heal. And what most people don't understand is that spirituality is not an escape from the body. It is a descent into it. It is learning to listen to your tension, your inflammation, your tight chest, not as flaws to be fixed, but as messages from the parts of you that were never heard. The more spiritually developed you become, the more somatically honest you must be. You can't fake peace anymore. You can't override your body just to meet someone's expectations. You start to trust your gut over their guilt, your intuition over their manipulation, your presence over their pressure. And this spiritual development is not just internal, it becomes visible. People sense something different. You no longer fold when they frown. You no longer over-explain, over-justify, or over-function. You stop rescuing others from the consequences of their choices. You stop apologizing for needing space. Your body becomes a temple, not a trash bin for everyone else's emotional baggage. And as this new rhythm settles in, the old stories begin to die. The story says you must earn love through sacrifice. The story that says your worth is tied to your usefulness. The story that says your needs are a burden. All of it dissolves. In its place, a new truth rises. That you were never too much. You were simply too awake in a world that thrives on numbness. And as your nervous system resets and your spiritual self reclaims its place, you begin to embody a quiet power that no longer negotiates with chaos. This is what true healing looks like. It is not a sudden transformation, but a slow, sacred unwinding. It is your body returning to its natural intelligence. It is your mind surrendering the need to fix everyone else. It is your heart remembering its own rhythm. You are not here to be everything for everyone. You are here to be true to yourself. And when you live from that truth, you don't just heal, you become whole. 6. The conscious empath's superpowers. When an empath stops living in survival mode and starts living in self-awareness, everything changes not on the surface, but deep in the energetic blueprint of their being. No longer driven by unconscious programming or emotional reflex, they begin to act with conscious sensitivity, choosing what they absorb, what they carry, and most importantly, what they release. This is not about becoming indifferent or cold. It's about becoming intelligent in your emotional responses, about awakening a deeper kind of spiritual wisdom that allows you to feel everything without letting it destroy you. Carl Jung's insight that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are speaks directly to the empath's path. You are not here to dissolve into other people's expectations. You are here to become sovereign, spiritually clear, emotionally grounded, and mentally discerning. As this shift occurs, intuition sharpens into an inner compass that doesn't just guide, it protects. No longer lost in the noise of everyone else's energy, the empath begins to hear the sound of their own soul. Creative flow opens up like a river, not forced or fabricated, but flowing naturally from inner alignment. They become magnetic, not through manipulation or performance, but through authenticity. Their energy is no longer something that leaks out in people-pleasing behaviors. It becomes a force field, a sacred container that attracts those who resonate with their truth and repels those who feed off their wounds. People who once used their kindness now find themselves unable to access their power because the empath has reclaimed it. There is no longer a desperate need to be understood. There is a quiet confidence in being aligned. That is what it means to be spiritually intelligent. The conscious empath does not seek validation in applause or approval. They begin to honor their yes and protect their no. They no longer feel guilty for taking space or for not fixing everyone else's problems. The weight of emotional responsibility lifts, not because they've stopped caring, but because they've started caring correctly, starting with themselves. Boundaries, once feared as walls, become the bridges that lead them back home to their truth. They are no longer the sponge for toxic emotions, but the mirror that reflects what is no longer theirs to hold. They've stopped betraying themselves to maintain false harmony, and that decision births a quiet revolution. This isn't ego, it's essence. What emerges is sovereignty, not a performance of strength, but the embodiment of it. The kind of emotional maturity that no longer craves being liked because it's anchored in being whole. The kind of spiritual awareness that doesn't react to drama because it recognizes projection. They see behind the masks, feel beneath the words, and respond with intelligence, not instinct. They become more powerful, not by force, but by presence. They become untouchable, not because they harden, but because they soften in the right direction. And in this softening, they find their power, not the kind that overpowers others, but the kind that reclaims themselves. 7. Jung's 5 principles for the conscious empath. When an empath awakens, they no longer confuse love with self-sacrifice. They begin to feel everything without absorbing anything, becoming attuned to the emotional landscape of others while staying rooted in their own inner world. This is not detachment, it's emotional intelligence. The conscious empath knows that to carry the pain of others is not compassion, but a silent form of self-abandonment. In this spiritual awakening, they learn to be present with suffering without drowning in it. They understand that feeling is a gift, but absorbing is a burden that was never meant to be theirs. This energetic boundary becomes the first step towards self-respect. They become aware that their nervous system is not a sponge for the world's chaos, and in choosing not to absorb, they do not become cold, they become clear. They move from being emotional containers to conscious channels, allowing feelings to flow through rather than stick to them. Then, they stop giving from depletion and begin giving from overflow. They no longer see exhaustion as evidence of virtue. They realize that true generosity does not require self-erasure. Spirituality teaches them that their well-being is not a luxury, it's a necessity. When their cup is full, what pours out is love, not resentment. They learn that giving from emptiness creates imbalance, and giving from fullness creates healing. The conscious empath builds rituals of self-replenishment, honors their energy as sacred, and gives without guilt. They are no longer seduced by the savior complex. They no longer need to be needed to feel valuable. Their self-worth becomes internal, steady, and unshakable. As they evolve, they learn to love without losing themselves. This is where the deeper work begins. Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole, and for the empath, this means disentangling love from enmeshment. They understand that disappearing inside relationships is not romantic, it's destructive. They stop molding themselves into what others want and start embodying who they truly are. They no longer fear being too much or not enough. They learn that boundaries are not walls. They are doors that allow the right energy in and the wrong energy out. They realize that love should expand you, not shrink you. And the moment you start editing yourself to be loved is the moment love turns into performance. The spiritual empath no longer performs, they radiate. They begin to help from inspiration, not guilt. The difference is radical. Guilt-driven helping is rooted in fear, in trauma, in the belief that love must be earned. But inspired helping is aligned with the soul. It arises naturally, not compulsively. It listens to intuition, not anxiety. Jung warned us that what remains unconscious will rule our lives, and we will call it fate. The empath who acts from guilt is being ruled by unhealed programming. But the one who acts from inspiration is free. They are no longer manipulated by cries for help that come from manipulation or entitlement. They know the difference between true need and energetic vampirism. They help not because they are afraid to say no, but because they are excited to say yes. Their service becomes authentic, not automatic. Finally, they learn to trust their inner knowing over external pressure. This is where their power crystallizes. They stop outsourcing their decisions to the expectations of others. They stop allowing guilt, shame, and approval seeking to override their intuition. They realize that the loudest voice is not always the wisest. The empath's true compass has always been within, but for years it was buried under the noise of people-pleasing and social conditioning. Now, they listen inward. They trust the quiet whisper of truth over the roaring demand for conformity. Spiritual wisdom teaches them that alignment is more important than approval, and that peace is the new success. They begin to live from within. Their nervous system becomes their oracle. Their intuition becomes their leadership. Their life becomes an embodiment of sacred discernment. This is the conscious empath, grounded, awake, whole. They are not here to be understood by everyone. They are here to be aligned with themselves. They no longer need to be liked, only to be true. They walk with grace, give with clarity, and love with boundaries. They are not broken. They are finally becoming who they were always meant to be. And so, when the empath finally stops pleasing everyone, they don't lose their light. They become the fire. Carl Jung taught us that true individuation isn't about rebellion or rejection, but the quiet, unwavering return to one's authentic self. If this message resonated with your soul, let it stir something within. Leave a comment and tell us what part of your journey you're reclaiming today. And don't forget, if you found value in this video, please share it with someone who needs this reminder, subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss what's coming next on your path to awakening. The 3 moments that almost destroy every empath, and how Carl Jung says you survive them. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. Carl Jung. Welcome to Spiritual Wisdom. Today, we're diving into the 3 moments that almost break every empath. The moments that shake your identity, test your boundaries, and push your heart to the edge. But more importantly, we'll explore how Carl Jung's teachings reveal the exact inner strengths that help you survive, rise, and transform through them. As you listen, reflect on your own journey. Which of these moments have you faced, and what did they teach you about yourself? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be the light someone else needs today. The first deadly moment, the recognition of non-reciprocity. The first deadly moment in an empath's life is the recognition of non-reciprocity. That piercing instant when you finally see with painful clarity that the warmth, gentleness, and emotional depth you offer so naturally are not being returned in the same way. And this realization almost destroys you because it collapses the quiet illusion that others feel relationships as deeply as you do, exposes how many of your bonds have been quietly one-sided, and forces you into a kind of inner exile that feels like psychological aloneness. It is in this raw place that so many empaths begin blaming themselves, wondering if they were too intense, too sensitive, too available, or too loving, while others swing toward cynicism, convincing themselves that real closeness does not exist. But beneath all of this emotional turbulence lies a spiritual truth that Carl Jung insisted on confronting. You are not actually seeing the person, you are seeing the projection of your own empathy reflected back at you. And it is this projection that creates the illusion of reciprocity. When the projection breaks, the truth appears, and it is this unveiling that feels like heartbreak. Yet Jung's survival protocol, conscious discrimination, exists precisely for this moment. It is a discipline of clarity, a willingness to observe people as they are, rather than as your heart hopes they might become. And this clarity becomes the foundation of your spiritual awakening, because it teaches you that empathy is not a universal language. It is a rare dialect, spoken fluently only by a few. Conscious discrimination asks you to stop pouring your emotional energy into relationships that do not, cannot, or will not reciprocate, because continuing to give deeply in desert soil will only lead you to spiritual exhaustion. This is why Jung's wisdom echoes through the metaphor, "Don't plant orchids in desert soil." A reminder that even the most precious seeds cannot bloom where the environment itself rejects nourishment. To practice this, you must begin noticing subtler forms of reciprocity, the way someone listens when you speak, whether they initiate connection or only respond when needed, whether they show care without being prompted, whether they repair after conflict or simply wait for you to fix everything. These tiny behavioral patterns hold spiritual wisdom because they reveal the architecture of a person's emotional world. When you stop projecting your empathy onto others, these patterns become easier to see. And with each act of seeing, you reclaim a piece of the power you once surrendered to imbalance. This moment of recognition is devastating, not because others are unkind, but because you finally witness the truth without the cushioning of illusion. It forces you to realize that your emotional generosity cannot transform someone who is unwilling to meet you at your depth. But rather than hardening your heart, conscious discrimination refines it. It teaches you that spirituality is not passive softness. It is disciplined awareness, a grounded understanding of where your energy flows and where it drains. It shows you that spiritual awakening is not only about transcendent experiences. Sometimes it is about identifying the subtle dynamics that quietly shape your emotional life and learning how to navigate them with maturity and grace. As you move through this recognition, the grief that rises is not a sign of personal failure. It is the release of an outdated narrative that once governed your relationships. The sadness belongs not to the truth itself, but to the years you spent believing that your empathy alone could sustain connection. In this grief, you begin to realign your boundaries. You learn to draw a sacred circle around your emotional energy and to protect it not with walls, but with discernment. You begin to understand that the right relationships will not need to be rescued, revived, or restructured. They will breathe on their own. When this clarity takes root, your internal world begins to shift. You stop being magnetized toward emotional desserts and start gravitating toward environments where mutuality exists naturally. You recognize that intimacy is not created through effort alone, but through resonance. You finally understand that your empathy is a gift, but only when offered to people who can receive it without draining you. And slowly, quietly, powerfully, the moment that once felt like destruction becomes the threshold of transformation, guiding you toward relationships where your heart is not a burden, but a match, and your depth is not a risk, but a home. Have you ever realized you were giving your heart to people who could never truly meet you halfway? If so, share your experience in the comments below so others can learn from your journey. And if you're just beginning to awaken to this truth, type, "I see it now." Let this be your moment of clarity and strength. The second deadly moment: dissolution of self through accommodation. You arrive at the second deadly moment, the dissolution of self through accommodation, when you suddenly become aware that you have been shape-shifting for so long that your own inner voice has faded into the background. And every time you adjusted yourself to keep the peace, meet expectations, or carry emotional weight for others, another piece of your true identity sank beneath the surface until one day someone asks you, "What do you want?" And the question lands like a shock because the honest answer feels blurry, frightening, and painfully unclear. This moment almost destroys empaths because you built not one identity, but many, each one carefully molded to avoid conflict or disappointment. And while these personas helped you survive, they also pulled you further away from your center, burying your real preferences, burying your real needs, and burying the self that once felt natural. Then, when the exhaustion becomes unbearable, your instincts often push you toward a sudden rebellion, a dramatic swing to the opposite extreme, where you try to reclaim yourself by rejecting everything and everyone at once. But this opposite persona is just another mask, another overcorrection, another counterfeit version of you. Carl Jung's survival protocol interrupts this collapse with something steady, grounded, and deeply connected to spirituality and spiritual development. Active imagination for self-recovery. A practice where you stop shape-shifting long enough to ask yourself real questions and give space for the authentic answer to rise. You sit with yourself without trying to perform, impress, or say what sounds reasonable. Instead, you wait for the quiet voice beneath the noise of habit and obligation. You start small, asking what kind of morning rhythm feels natural, which people energize you, what pace your body prefers, what foods you actually enjoy, and you treat these answers as a rediscovery rather than a luxury. This process teaches you the essential skill that every empath must learn to survive. Letting people feel disappointed without rushing in to fix their discomfort. Disappointment is not danger. Disappointment is not a failure of kindness. Disappointment is simply proof that you are no longer abandoning yourself to keep the world smooth. From here, you rebuild your identity slowly, preference by preference, boundary by boundary, because the real self doesn't return in a single breakthrough moment. It returns through small choices that honor your values and match your energy. You speak to yourself as if guiding a friend. You are allowed to rest without reasons. You are allowed to say no without guilt. You are allowed to stop carrying what doesn't belong to you. And each sentence becomes a thread that pulls you back to center. Along the way, guilt will try to disguise itself as goodness, telling you that you are selfish for choosing yourself. But if you look closer, you will see that guilt appears only when you stop performing the role others benefited from, not when you do something wrong. That realization marks the beginning of inner healing, because now you respond not with rebellion, but with clarity, replacing overreactions with calm boundaries like, "I'm not available for that," and letting the sentence stand without explanation. When confusion arises, you anchor yourself to tiny, doable steps. 1. Honest no. This week, 1 conversation you exit when your body tightens. 1 evening you protect for quiet. And as you repeat these choices, your center grows stronger. You begin to recognize which roles require self-betrayal and slowly let them go. You learn to measure your progress by congruence instead of approval, noticing when your words, actions, and inner signals finally match. Through this slow, steady rebuilding, you transform the dissolution of self from a breaking point into a turning point, reclaiming the identity you lost through years of over-accommodation and stepping back into a life shaped not by expectation, but by truth. If this second deadly moment resonates with you, declare your strength in the comments below. Write, "I honor my true self, and I choose to stay whole." Your words may inspire another empath who needs this reminder today. The third deadly moment, the recognition of fundamental aloneness. The third deadly moment comes when you finally awaken to the haunting realization that no one will ever completely understand your inner world. No matter how close, loving, or intuitive another person may be, there will always remain an unbridgeable distance between your soul and theirs. For empaths, this truth strikes like lightning. It shatters the lifelong dream of perfect mutual understanding. You've likely built your relationships on the hope that someone could mirror your emotions, read your silences, and grasp your heart's language without you needing to explain. When you discover that such total connection is impossible, it can trigger a wave of existential despair so deep it threatens to pull you under. Many empaths respond by withdrawing, closing their hearts, and convincing themselves that it's safer not to feel at all. Carl Jung, whose spiritual wisdom continues to illuminate the depths of human experience, offered a path through this darkness. Accept the paradox. You are fundamentally alone, and yet meaningful connection is still possible. This isn't resignation, it's liberation. The moment you stop demanding perfect understanding from others, you begin to appreciate the beauty of partial understanding. You realize that love doesn't need to be flawless to be real. Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." With this truth, you see that your loneliness isn't a punishment. It's an invitation to deepen your relationship with yourself. From here begins the sacred art of self-companionship. Instead of craving constant validation, you start nurturing your own inner dialogue, learning to be good company to yourself. You speak to your heart gently, listen to your thoughts without judgment, and offer compassion where there was once self-criticism. This inner friendship becomes a source of stability that no external relationship can replace. As you fill your inner world with understanding and care, your outer connections begin to change. You no longer reach out from emptiness, but from fullness. You no longer demand that others rescue you from isolation. Instead, you meet them as equals, offering presence instead of need. In time, you see the miracle. Even though no one can completely know you, they can still meet you where it matters. A look, a word, a shared silence, these small bridges of connection become sacred. You stop measuring love by how perfectly it reflects you and begin to value how sincerely it touches you. And through this acceptance, your relationships deepen. You love without illusion. You listen without expectation. And you give without fear of being misunderstood. Jung taught that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. In embracing your aloneness, you discover that authenticity is the key to real connection. It's not about finding someone who fully understands you. It's about learning to live truthfully within yourself and bringing that truth to others. So when that crushing awareness comes that no one will ever fully know your soul, remember that it's not the end, but the beginning of real spiritual awakening. It's the moment your empathy matures into wisdom. It's the point where you stop looking for mirrors and start becoming light. And in that luminous self-acceptance, you finally understand what Carl Jung meant, that our task is not to escape solitude, but to find God, truth, and peace within it, and then share that peace, imperfectly but beautifully, with the world. If this moment spoke to your soul, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Tell us how you faced your own fundamental aloneness, and let's continue growing together on this journey of spiritual wisdom. 4. What happens when an empath survives all three moments? When an empath survives all three breaking points, the moment they stop rescuing people who refuse to rise, the moment they stop dissolving themselves to keep everyone else calm, and the moment they face the loneliness that comes after finally setting boundaries, they do not become colder, they become clearer. And this clarity is the foundation of spirituality and spiritual awakening. The inner shift where emotional overwhelm turns into emotional intelligence. Jung reminds us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And surviving these thresholds makes you conscious in a way you have never been before, shaping what he calls a tempered empathy. Empathy that is soft but not porous, compassionate but not self-destructive, loving but never blind. This tempered empathy rests first on discernment, the ability to know who can truly reciprocate. You begin to sense the difference between someone who is hurting and someone who is harmful, between someone who needs support and someone who drains you because it is their pattern, not their moment. You start watching actions instead of promises, effort instead of excuses, repair instead of emotional theatrics. You learn that reciprocity is not about perfection, but about willingness. Do they show up? Do they try? Do they take responsibility? Discernment becomes the inner filter that protects your heart from becoming a free emotional service station for those who thrive on taking without returning. This is not coldness, it is stewardship, the wisdom of tending your emotional garden with a gate instead of leaving it open to anyone who wanders by. From that clarity grows authentic selfhood, the end of shape-shifting. You stop twisting yourself into whatever form keeps the peace. You stop swallowing your truth so others won't feel uncomfortable. You stop performing softness just to be acceptable. Instead, you reclaim your preferences, your boundaries, your voice. Your yes becomes intentional. Your no becomes clean. And your presence gains weight because you are no longer bending to match the room. People trust you more because you are solid. Your energy stops flickering between versions of yourself and begins to stabilize into who you actually are. The masks you wore to survive childhood finally fall away, and in their place rises a self that is honest, grounded, and not afraid to be seen. As your selfhood strengthens, you begin to form realistic connection, the ability to value imperfect but genuine communion. You stop chasing fantasy bonds and start appreciating relationships built on effort, repair, and mutual growth. You understand that intimacy is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of willingness. You choose the friend who shows up late but consistently over the person who dazzles you for a week, then disappears. You prefer the partner who learns out loud over the one who performs perfection. You stop expecting people to read your mind and begin practicing small, honest conversations that keep the connection real. You allow space for differences because you realize authentic bonds are not seamless. They are shaped, like pottery, through pressure, release, and return. Finally, surviving these thresholds leads you into self-companionship, the deepest relationship you will ever build, the one with yourself. You stop searching for constant external soothing and learn to become your own emotional anchor. You build rituals that steady your nervous system, create inner safety through routine, and learn to sit with your own discomfort without abandoning yourself. You begin hearing your intuition with new clarity, the tightening that signals a no, the warmth that signals a yes, the inner voice that becomes less like a whisper and more like guidance. When you nurture self-trust, you no longer negotiate for crumbs of validation. You offer yourself presence, rest, kindness, and truth. And with that inner bond, you stop fearing solitude because you are no longer alone inside yourself. Together, discernment, authentic selfhood, realistic connection, and self-companionship transform the empath's journey from constant emotional survival into grounded emotional mastery. They allow you to remain open without being unprotected, loving without being depleted, sensitive without being overwhelmed. They turn your empathy from something that once endangered you into something that empowers you, aligning your heart with truth, your energy with wisdom, and your path with a strength that can finally sustain you. In the end, these 3 breaking points aren't meant to destroy you. They're meant to reveal the strength, intuition, and deep inner knowing you were born with. As Carl Jung reminds us, the moments that threaten to shatter the empath are often the very ones that awaken their true power. If today's message from Spiritual Wisdom spoke to your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming videos filled with deeper insights and transformative wisdom.